Energy has got to be just one of the talking points for the ANC Policy Conference taking place here at Nasrec Expo Centre this weekend. The formal programme, if you just joined us, to remind you, is going to get underway just after 9 o'clock this morning. Of course, we're going to be here throughout the day and throughout the weekend, but there's a lot we need to talk about. We just heard Govan was talking about energy. Let's bring in political analyst Lihle Ngcobozi joining us this morning. Lihle, good to have you on eNCA. And there is so much to talk about. I think what we need to try and do is, before we get into the meat of how the ANC is going to do this, we're going to talk about policy documents, policy statements. But what stands out for me is, and I'd like to start here, a policy roadmap with so much to discuss. Yeah. Where would you think we should be starting as the ANC Policy Conference? Sure.
I mean, I think an overall analysis of where the party is something that I think the ANC needs to take very, very seriously, because we're finding the ANC in crisis. There are many competing factors which are internal and external to the ANC, which implicate many ways in which the organization is failing, and in many ways that we can see points and entry points for improvement. But I also think the hot potato is this idea around organizational renewal, and this has been coming for a very long time, right? It's not new to this particular conference. We had it in 2017. It even goes back to the era of Oliver Tambo, who spoke about the year of the cadre. We've had different iterations of that, and fundamentally that speaks about what is the kind of cadre that the ANC is attracting currently, and two, is that particular cadre able to sustain sort of not just the liberation movement and the liberation ideals of the party, but in the modern era, is the cadre fit for service? And what are the different contextual issues that the cadre is facing currently in its ability or inability to govern effectively, should they become the incumbent in the next round of elections?
The cadre deployment has been an issue now for some time, even been brought up by opposition parties, questioning how are cadres decided upon, and once they are deployed, what are the checks and balances to reel them in, to remove them from their position if they're not seen to be effective. And I think South Africa, I mean, I know we're talking about the ANC here, but these deployments have a very real effect on all South Africans, because it goes from the top right down to the lowest levels, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I think part of the issue of analysis in South Africa is that we tend to separate what happens at the policy conference from the actual real implications that it would have on the state, and also the implications it would have on governance going forward. And so these key deployees play a very intricate role in state-owned enterprises, in different state institutions, and therefore we need to take seriously what is the role of that particular policy, specifically around cadre deployment, and what does it mean for the efficiency of state institutions. And so this kind of the kinds of disagreements or contestations around this policy is something that we need to take seriously in relation to how we've actually seen the state being drained by this particular policy, and how it has impacted things such as state capture, malfeasance, as well as sort of the unethical practices that we've seen going around in our state institutions.
And the one directly leads into the other. So right now we're talking about cadre deployment. You kick the tin a bit further down the road, don't you? And suddenly we have to talk about the step aside resolution and the step aside policy as well, because exactly what you're saying here, it's led to malfeasance. It ended up with the state capture inquiry. So you can't separate the step aside from the cadre deployment, can you?
No, you can't. And I was listening to a conversation earlier, or rather late last night, where Gwede Mandashi was speaking to one of the local newspapers, and the way in which he describes the cadre deployment was around issues of race and sort of trying to undo sort of the racial injustices of the past, of black people not being able to have access to particular positions of power. And that is fine, right? The ANC has tried in many ways to remedy the kinds of racial discrepancies that have gone on, particularly in hiring in corporate or in business. But what happens is that this kind of thing can't be seen in isolation. The inability of that particular policy to insulate state institutions from things such as state capture is the point of contention. So what then do we do when we see people that have been deployed in particular activities that drain the state from its efficiency and its effectiveness? And the policy doesn't make room for that. And then step aside comes in, right? And it's supposedly supposed to regulate behaviors. In many ways, it's also supposed to instill some form of discipline within the party. However, within the context of factionalism, is it able to do that? And in my opinion, I don't think it does that, because there's no sort of systemic, clear outlining of how this policy is supposed to work. Is it a tit-for-tat kind of situation? Does it target specific groups and specific people? And we've seen throughout the conferences that part of the contestation is that there's no general rule of application when it comes to the step aside. And so that kind of contention is something that I think will be debated within the policy conference coming this afternoon as well.
Let's end our discussion on contestation for a moment, because we saw what happened down in KZN at their elective conference. Some people lauding the ANC president, knowing he was going to get heckled, but still going on stage to do it. I think you would agree that the ANC president didn't have a choice but to go, or else KZN would have been seen as a no-go area, which the president of the ANC couldn't have done. As I say goodbye to you for the moment, Lihle, how do you see the regional and provincial politics of the ANC playing out here at Policy Conference? Are you expecting disruptions?
In my opinion, not necessarily. I don't think the stakes are as high here as they will be in December. I think people will make the opportunity, this conference, as sort of putting out their feelers out there and kind of seeing where they can lobby and who is siding with who and which kind of factions can develop coming out of this particular conference. But I don't think the stakes are as high as they will be in December. And I think this is an opportunity for the ANC to actually show us that its policy nerve center is still functioning, one, and two, it's still responsive to the contextual issues of the day. And if it fails to do that, it also signals to us, the citizen, that the intellectual arm of the party has died. And if they're not able to show us something fundamentally different, then we have a very serious problem.
And we're going to pick up on this again, Lihle, I'm sure when we speak to you again a little bit later. I was waiting for my team to tell me if we have Supermanle Goge for us to go to in a moment. But just while we're doing that, I'm having a little bit of a break up with my communications to my team. I'm going to just take a second, see if I can bring it back in. Very briefly, when we talk about the elective conference later in the year, just makes sense for South Africans who aren't ANC members, Lihle, who don't follow ANC politics. Why is this so important for the nation to watch this? Because this is not just about the ANC. It does have a knock-on effect, real terms, for all of us South Africans, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I think this is the arena where we get to see the different struggles within the party, but beyond that, how then that will spill over into the state, into state institutions, into institutions of governance, which is what South Africans are wanting to see revived in the coming elections, right? And this is the opportunity for the ANC to actually show us and take us into its confidence to say, as the possible voter coming up, what are the kinds of things that we can look out for? What are the policy interventions that the ANC is going to be able to make? And are they able to persuade us, again, into believe, or for those who are voting for the ANC, will they be able to persuade them into seeing the ANC as a reputable party, one, as a reputable arm of governance in South Africa, and two, are they able to renew itself in a way that speaks to the very critical issues that general South Africans are facing? Issues of legitimacy of the party is something that a lot of South Africans feel that the ANC has lost its legitimacy. And will the ANC be able to revive that? And if it's not being able to, it needs to show us that within these particular conferences, and the kinds of people that then they elect coming into the conference in December will be a very strong signal to South Africans about whether or not the ANC takes the voters seriously.
And the ANC needs to look at the voters very seriously. With the back of the last local government elections, we've got next elections coming up 2024. How the ANC manages its policy here and how that transferred to elective conference in December, that's going to be the ANC this country has to vote for. So I imagine Cyril Ramaphosa and his team need to think very carefully, because South Africans and ANC members showed last elections, we've got you. We've got your number. You need to do better.
Definitely. But I think beyond that, it also tells us, is the ANC able to imagine itself as a party in opposition? If there's a possibility.
Have you imagined them as a party in opposition?
I don't think they have the kind of strategic muscle to think of themselves as that, because we've seen that all of the measures, most of the measures that they've lost, they haven't been able to gain back. And so what does that say about the ANC's inability to evolve from a dominant party to one that now has to be in opposition or possibly enter into coalitions? And the ANC has not really been decisive on what is its key strategic priorities if that becomes the reality for it.
And it's going to become the reality for it if they don't come up with those key strategic decisions and actually implement them as well. It's one thing to make decisions, you need to actually go and implement it. It's so good having you with us. I'm sure we're going to talk again. Appreciate the time of Lihle Ngcobozi, political analyst, joining us here on eNCA.